All right, and welcome to Better Understanding the Bible. I'm your host, Alice, and joined again with Mercy as we talk origins. Thanks for joining us again, Mercy. Hope you're enjoying all these heretical talks we get into.
Well, I feel like we're moving into a new session or a new kind of conversation as we've been laying down a lot of foundational terminology. So I'm really looking forward to to the extent of how we can dialogue together about the relevance of what we've all been sharing together on these videos.
Yeah, now that for those of you who have maybe only caught up with the past couple videos and maybe new to the channel, go check out a lot of the previous videos. Laying out, especially like the 7 days verse by verse series. So if you go and start there, look at the book series, a few of those kind of bigger series where we like. I go into great detail, and then you'll see where Mercy kind of comes along and joins in. So it's right before there. Get that information in because that's what we're really expanding on now. That's kind of more the geeky, get into the texts, go verse by verse, word by word. And now what we're doing is we're more unpacking concepts and getting into the now that we've got the information out, the heck does all this mean? So that's kind of what we're chopping at here. That's what these talking about origins is kind of getting into. So if you're not familiar with that data, please go check it out. That's what we're always referencing back to is all the stuff previously made before the origins talks began. So there you go. There's a big plug. Get you to go back and check out those videos. But other than that, today's conversation is a long time coming, but it's a big deal, and it has to do with if we're looking at a situation where the Bible was talking about Adam's descendants, us culminating in Jesus, the last Adam, then what are we reading the Bible for still today? Is there any real relevance to us today? And why would we need it? So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. And this has a huge, huge implication because typically what we've come from is all humans came from Adam, so all humans were under sin. Now Jesus came for all humans to start a new thing, and so depending on what your eschatology views are, we're in a weird situation because we've shifted from that beginning. So now we're not looking at all humans; we're looking at an individual who started a people. Then this people group became other people groups, who this other people group claimed rights from, who then this people group came to an end, and that whole story ended. So it's a very big shift away from that. And we can understand in a way, well, if I'm still a belief that this new covenant's reigning and ruling and we've got to get apart from Adam, how that we're still part of that, but we've removed ourselves from that in that completion of the story of Adam. We've also seen even a lot of full preterism. We see the branch of IO, we see the branch of covenant eschatology. But at the end of the day, like what's relevant in the Bible for us? Like, is it even about us? And if it is or isn't, then why should we even read it? So now what's Adam only view? And again, I just want to put this out there. We're not trying to start a religion. Adam only is just a way to make distinct the differences between what I'm finding in my teachings and what we've commonly come to understand as either Israel only or covenant creation fulfilled eschatology. That's where I've come from, but it's just gone more, just gone further. And so that's all this is this conversation has gone further. Mercy's come along and has found what I've been saying to be quite interesting and said, wait a minute. And we're just over a year now at battling through this together to make sure, we're not just making things up because it's really easy to do, especially when we're talking about completion. Because I think that's one of the big tricks is we want to write ourselves into the Bible. What do you say? That's one of the big, probably if not the biggest issue when we want to pick up this book.
Yeah, I mean, we focus in on this audience relevance and cultural relevance. And I don't think I know any other book, any historical book, any autobiography, any classical book that we read in our modern world and we open it up and say, "Oh, I'm a part of that." We don't ever do that with anything else, but when it comes to the Bible, because of the way it's been taught, because of the way it's been preached in Christendom, we have millions and millions of people that come into the text. They don't even know that they're doing it, but again, they set themselves up and say, "Oh, I have to find myself into the text." And this is, yes, the biggest problem. And what I love about what you're doing and your work is that from, the beginning of Genesis all the way to Revelation, it's totally consistent all the way through. And the clarity of this single covenantal story of starting with Adam and finishing the first Adam, finishing with the last Adam, Jesus. Oh my gosh, it is absolutely revolutionary. It clarifies so many things. Everything starts to connect and you see it for what it is and you appreciate it more. That's where I've come to. And that's why I'm still here, because I know all the other branches, full preterism, covenant eschatology, covenant creation, all of these views. And yes, there are points of view that I think everybody agrees with, but yet there are very great distinctions that makes us worlds apart. And that's really important of your view, in that it is a single covenantal system. And we're seeing how God is interacting from that moment all the way to now. And let's take a look at his faithfulness and how trustworthy he is. That's a beautiful message.
And part of this struggle too is not that one was better than the other, but they've all been building upon each other, which hopefully then now this branch that I'm discovering and we're working through, and this is for all the public to see, just doing it right on YouTube here. Is
Mm.
this relevant? Is this real? And how does it affect it? So out of this, everybody, it doesn't matter who's been looking at this, whether it becomes through Beyond Creation Science, creation, covenant creation views, or Israel only, or the Don K. Preston views for covenant. It doesn't matter. We need an ending. And that's the big separation, is how it began and how it ended, and how does that affect us. And so they have interesting endings, and unfortunately the audience relevancy thing that we were bringing up earlier now really muddles into this, depending on how you choose to read the text.
Mm.
So obviously futurism keeps themselves as we are the end, and then we have with covenant eschatology, well, there's it ended for them and now we're the them. So they've transitioned, they're no longer about Israel, now it's about us.
Yeah, they
And
just substitution right there, just a substitution there. Yeah, and it's easy to do if you don't understand the single covenant. This,
well, and plus we're reading it as we're the church. So when it says there, to the church, like, oh yeah, we're, and so it's quite easy to fall into that. And it's Christendom, like you said. So when you come to it, you just learn this is what it is.
mm,
And so covenant eschatology is continued in that same vein. Covenant creation is the new heaven, new earth idea as well. Same idea, covenant eschatology, bringing the whole world in. Although it is a little bit different, which I find, a lot of conversation should be had around this, because Genesis, if it's talking about Adam, well, then how does the whole world get involved in there? And when it ends about Adam, the whole world gets involved in there somewhere. So again, conversations, that's why we're doing this, is to get this we've got to get these conversations figured out, because I think we've moved past those questions now. And hopefully, that's why we're fleshing this out here, is because somebody's going to take what we're fleshing out, they're going to flesh it out even better. And we need these stages and stepping stones. Not one of us has it figured out, but a lot of us seem to stop and think we're good enough. I'm just not there yet. It's not good enough yet. So when we're taking a look at that, that's brought us now to this position, which is, well, then what's relevant to us today? If fulfill eschatology, Israel only, Adam only, whatever you want to call it, if you believe the Bible has been fulfilled, what does it mean to us? Now, covenant eschatology still goes along the lines that we need to pray to Jesus and we have to join the church. And so basically, they're still living in the time period of Acts. So they're just, I'm not trying to be rude or put anyone down, just quick summaries. Obviously, summaries don't completely give the true full position. So I don't mean any offense. We understand. And that's why we're kind of all here anyway. We get those views. But at the same time, too, there's the whole covenant eschatology still sees everyone in Adam. So now if we move forward to covenant creation, they take that out of Adam, and so does Israel only, and so do what we're discovering here. But then that really changes things, because when we get to the end, if it starts only about Adam, or in Israel only's case, Israel, how then when we get to the end does all humans get added in? So covenant creation adds all humans in. Israel only says, oh, this is just the national, physical, biological descendants of Abraham. So that's very exclusive. and Adam only. No, very similar in the sense that it's just the people of the ruling class of the Mesopotamian covenant lines, just Adam and his descendants over those people. So what then does this mean? Because, depending on how you look at the end, there's still a lot of similarities with all these views, which is now that it's ended, what relevance is there to us today? Well, if we're not under the law, then if we're not under sin? So there's a lot of questions, and hopefully that's what we're going to start getting into here. I don't know, is there anything that you think we should hit on? Because obviously that audience relevancy, I think, is the tripping point. That was for me. But once I got over the realize, wait a minute, this isn't talking about me. That's when it started making sense.
Hmm. And to add to that audience relevance, we talk about it all the time in full preterism and in, covenant creation. But it's so funny. We talk about it, talk about it, and it's like, yes, I see. Oh, just House of Israel, just House of Judah. Oh, it was just like the Gentiles. And then all of a sudden at the end, it's us. We inject ourselves again in there. And what has helped me a lot through the various studies that I've done with you is that I look at the Bible now as that Suzerain Vassal Treaty. That is a Rosetta Stone for the whole framework of the Bible. And we've done several videos on that. And so when you look at that in the Suzerain Vassal Treaty context, what you're seeing is, let's put it in modern terminology, I see the Bible as one case study, but it took millennia of years, right? 4,000 years to pass. And look at how faithful that is. Like, how do you have a culture and you're bringing that right narrative all the way through, and it's lasting for that long of a period? That's very unique, and that's very special when you look at how long it's continued, and that there is a beginning point and an ending point. So when you look at it as like a case study, and then it becomes like this type and shadow, both the old covenant and the new covenant is a type and shadow, then you can put it in the context of, oh my gosh, this was like a court case that God had in that suzerain vassal relationship of what? Them being in blessed position, then in heaven, and then now they're on the earth, they're in a cursed position if they're cast down, and then, oh my gosh, they're now judged, they're in the seas. If you see that triangle kind of system, then you recognize, oh my gosh, this was the same people that God began with, and he was so faithful that he ended up and he fulfilled everything that he was going to do with them in that process. And he's the one that brought it through. When you see it as that case study or that court case, all the way through, it totally opens your eyes to put it in that framework and stay there. Don't put yourself in it or inject something out or whatever. Just keep it that way, nice and steady. Oh my goodness, it opens up your eyes to be like, I understand the Bible now. How amazing.
Well, we got to understand it's a catalog, it's a record of something. It's not, and this is where we get into the context of this beginning is going to set the whole stage to the context of, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, is why would the Bible be relevant to us today? And is there biblical precedence for it? That's a big deal. I think we can't just choose and say, I feel like I know God because of the Bible. I can't make these social, emotional, intellectual I knows. It can't be that. It's got to be, well, show me, you got to be able to show me some kind of precedent, some kind of idea. And so that's what I want to get into. But in order to do that, that's where we're going to lay down the foundation of, well, what is the context we're bringing to this? We kind of just did a quick summary. Didn't want to get into too much detail of kind of what's out there, and to understand then how can the Bible be relevant to us, and can it be relevant to us when it's not even talking about us? And I'm hopefully going to try to convince you that it is, not by trying to convince you, but by simply looking at it for what it is. And we'll see where this goes. All right, cool. Anything you want to throw in before I do my little rant here?
Oh, right into it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is just a quick recap. If you've been going through the videos with us, just going to do a quick context of what is the Bible, what's its message to us, so that we can start looking at, well, what does it mean to us now if the story is fulfilled? All right. First of all, to understand what is ending, the only thing that you can't determine any of that until at least you figure out why it started. And I don't think people put enough weight to that. We really need to understand this principle extremely well. We will never know what is ending, how it's ending, why it's ending, what, anything about it until we know what started and why it started. And so when we take a look at Genesis, we have to ask a very hard question. What is it talking about? Why is it happening?
Mm.
And if we don't have that answer, we can't say why it's ending and what's ending.
Mm.
And so, from my position, from what I found is, so when we take a look at, obviously through the authorship, we have Moses being accredited with the authorship. And we've gone through this in other videos, so I'm not going to go into depth with any of these explanations. If you need to, feel free to go through those videos because, like I said before, this is where we're making just references. So now, at Moses, who wrote the Torah, Egypt has just, been destroyed. They've gone through the turmoil under judgment of their God. Moses has pulled Egypt out, or Israel out of Egypt, rather. They brought them to the mountain of God and they made covenant. Well, then Moses is told to write down these books. Now, this position, this that we're taking is we're looking at it from what would these people who were living at the, after this period, what would they have believed?
Mm.
Reference after reference, scripture after scripture, the law of Moses that God gave to Moses, God revealed to Moses, God talked to Moses. This is the law of Moses. Go do how the law of Moses was written. Go and get the ark and do what Moses commanded in the law. In the New Testament, openly over and over again, that the law of Moses was given to him by God. So the culture, it doesn't matter what we find. It's not important. What's important is what would they have thought. Well, even in the time period of the New Testament, in their mind, Moses wrote the Torah. And so we're going to read it as such, which then really helps bring context in. Why? Because Moses has just brought these people out of Egypt, brought them to the mountain of God, and he made covenant. And that covenant was recorded, like Mercy was saying, in a suzerain vassal treaty contract, which tells us the context. Oh, I just got my first dropout there. Is everything good?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, so that tells us a lot about the context in that suzerain vassal treaty context. Why? Because tells us about the historical prologue, and Genesis is acting as that. Moses brought the people out, entered into covenant agreement with God, and in order to establish this covenant agreement, he had to establish the history of why Israel was coming into this agreement, which was, and this is the context of Genesis 1, was Moses was claiming that there was war and chaos in the land and of Mesopotamia and the region surrounding it. So, because of God's great love for the land and the people of the land, he sent a man to rule over them. It was no different than what we see at the time of Jesus. The land was in chaos. The people had become apostate. No one was there to lead the people. So Jesus, a light was sent. So we see in Genesis 1, the light was sent, and it was a kingdom, just like with Jesus. And Adam's kingdom was constructed, and they were given dominion on day 6. Day 2, they were raised up above and put into heavenly places, and they were put over the land to subdue them and have dominion. And they then also made agreements to represent through that covenant. So that was the agreement. How they got into the dominion, they got into the heavenly places of God. How? By going into covenant. And we read that in Genesis 2, talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and how Moses, the author, went out of his way to duplicate the word for word usage of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as he does in Deuteronomy 30, talking about the covenant agreement. So this is all that suzerain vassal treaty stipulations. So what is Moses doing? Adam entered into a covenant agreement with God. Adam was given dominion over the land in order to return them to order. And then he, unfortunately, just wasn't able to live up to that agreement. And as a result, he failed and was cast out. So what Moses is doing is he's saying, God sent Adam to restore order to the land, bring peace and justice and bring goodness and prosperity to the peoples. But he was unable to do so. In fact, he ended up with his descendants polluting the land because of their bad choices, their bad leadership. So now God came in and he wiped those people out because they didn't live up to the agreement, and gave to his descendant that same covenant duty, and not only duty, but blessings of dominion and rule, and to be above everybody. And so now Adam started the covenant, didn't live up to the covenant. Covenant was taken from him and given to Noah. Unfortunately, with Noah, though, he did not also live up to the covenant, so it was taken from him and given to one of his descendants, who was actually where we see the next transition was into Abraham, where it was a promise. So with Adam, the dominion was made, but he failed. It went to Noah. Noah failed, and the promise to restore it went to Abraham. Then the promise to his son Isaac, the promise to restore it went, and to his son Jacob, it was finally made real in the 12 sons that came from Jacob, named Israel. And here's Moses standing with Egypt just at their back, looking at Israel, saying, "We have now inherited from Adam the dominion and the right to rule over all the land, to subdue them and put them under their feet. We have been raised up into the heavenly places to rule with God over the whole region of Mesopotamia." So Moses was claiming God sent them to restore order and peace to the land and be the representative of God's will to make this happen in the land, just as Adam. So, what is the context? Moses is claiming to be the new dominion of God, inherited from the first member of this covenant, Adam. Unfortunately, just like Adam, and unfortunately, just like Noah, Moses failed, and the body of Israel did not live up to its stipulations. However, this is a big deal. Now, things have changed, because there's a law that's in this agreement, which is upon the witnesses of two or three, now a man is worthy of death. While Moses, we have Adam who failed to live up to the agreement. Noah failed to live up to the agreement. If Israel fails to live up to the agreement, God's going to kill them, and God will be found untrustworthy. Why? Because God said he will give them a perfected kingdom. Well, how can they be the perfected kingdom if God has to wipe them out because they are unfaithful? So, like it says, if some of those being of the covenant were proved to be unfaithful, does that prove that God is being unfaithful? No. So that's why Messiah was sent to make sure this was a success. And the Messiah came and he established the perfect kingdom of David, but was rejected by his people. God sent them on a donkey. They were singing Hosanna, Hosanna, but they rejected him still. The chief priests gathered with Pontius Pilate and said, "I see nothing wrong with this guy. What, you want me to kill the king of the Jews?" And they said, "We have no king but Caesar." And Jesus was rejected. So the kingdom was taken away from Moses' Israel and given to Jesus and his Israel at his resurrection. So Adam failed, Noah failed, and now Israel through Moses was failing. So Jesus, an Israelite, born under the law, fulfilled the law, inherited the kingdom, and brought about its conclusion when he restored order to the land by establishing the perfected church, and using his power of authority sent Rome in to destroy the great evil corrupter, national apostate Moses, Israel. They had become the corruption in the land, just as old Adam. Jesus succeeded, fulfilled his requirements, and the land was restored to order, and the kingdom was completed. That end. Now, that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, because we're like, now, what do we do with that? Well, that's the story. What's the story? God, who took a people who lived in a time period of animal sacrifice, agricultural sacrifice, economic sacrifice, even at times human sacrifice, all the way. What's the very first thing he does with Abraham? Take Isaac to the hill. I don't want you to kill him. And the moment he goes to kill him, we're done with that. Whoop, get that off the table. The very first thing God does is starts to erode the culture from these people. He doesn't want them doing this. We see an evolution all the way up to when Jesus comes. And now what does he require? Authentic trust. That's it. Nothing else. What is it? I want you to be a spirit and truth. For God is spirit, and that's who he desires to come and worship Adam. God transitioned this entire people from as pagan as it can get down to human sacrifice of your children to a people who would just simply trust in God's character, which was trustworthy, to accept them. That was it. So there's an amazing transformation in this people. And this story then also leaves us with a couple of interesting examples for us who stand afar off looking upon this. For we see the whole story of Adam's beginning, his rise, and his fall from first Adam to last Adam, and to the point of God making sure that his covenant people succeeded, showed the character of God outside of the law. So now why is that important to us? It's really important to us for, and now I'm going to use Ezekiel 36 as an example. I'm going to go, you can take the whole chapter in, but I'm just going to start at 33 and read down to 36. We're going to take a look at this, not because this includes us, but we're going to take a look at this concept this is putting forward in light of, we just listed the lifespan of Adam. Adam was born in Genesis, continued into Israel, and ended in Jesus. The life of Adam came and went, which came to an end in the day of wrath in 70 AD. Now, when we take a look at Ezekiel 36, thus, starting at verse 33, rather, thus says the Lord God, on the day that I cleanse you from all your iniquities, I will cause the cities to be inhabited, and the waste places shall be rebuilt. And the land that was desolate shall be tilled, instead of being the desolation that it was in the sight of all who passed by. And they will say, this land was desolate, has become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined cities are now fortified and inhabited. The nations that are left around you shall know that I am the Lord. I have rebuilt these places and replanted that which was desolate. I am the Lord, I have spoken, and I will do it. Now, what I am going to point out here is what's interesting is this happens many times in the Bible. Over and over again, we see God doing a judgment on a people, and then this and this is reason why, and all this, and then at the end, it's qualified by, and let all those who see the judgment upon these people know that I, Yahweh, am Lord God. And so we see this with Sodom and all these examples of God's judgment so that the people around would know that Yahweh was God. Well, that's very interesting in this example, because in this example, we get what? The day when Eden is rebuilt. Well, that's the claim of John in Revelation, that Eden was rebuilt. And then what does it say? It says, when all those, what does it say in 35? And they will say, who? The nations that surround them, the nations that are left around shall know that I am the Lord. I have done this. When we, who are not part of those people, stand around and look into the book of Adam and read his story at his remains, then we can say, just like the nations surrounding them, wow. And where is it? They will know that I am the Lord. I can look at the Bible and say, that was the Lord. That was God that did that in Israel. Why? Because that's the remains of Adam. We saw it from start to finish, the story, it played out. So now we're getting that example of Adam for us to look at the remains of Adam, just as the nations would take a look at the remains of all these other examples of God. Now, I'm going to put this more into Paul's words because he explains it much better than I do. So let's put it in Paul's words into 1 Corinthians chapter 10. This is how We're going to take Paul's example here. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate from the same spiritual food, and all drank from the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, the most of them was with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. So Paul is saying that what they went through with Moses in the wilderness was an example for those people, Paul and who he was teaching, as examples for them, so that they too would not desire those evil things that the people in the wilderness did. So they could read Moses and go, oh, do you see what those people did? What they did against God? God wasn't pleased with them. Now that's that example. We can learn from that. And he follows it up with, do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did. And 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them, as they did when they were destroyed by the destroyer, as it says in Revelation, I send the destroyer out among you. Now these things happened to them. Now these things happened. So the destruction of those people happened to them as an example for who? They were written down for our instruction, on whom the ends of the age has come. So Paul is saying, so now not only does this act as an example of what not to do, but it actually is telling them this is what we should be doing. And why? Because it was written down as an example for them. Well, if we take those two concepts, the story of Adam being taken from tribalism, paganism, all the things that are lost in the human mind of what it takes to get into God's presence. And he brought them all the way to this people that could just simply trust in God's character. And he set that whole story to testimony. From Adam to last Adam, the story has been completed. And now we, after, can look upon the remains of Adam as an example to say, oh, God is trustworthy. I too want to trust in the God of Jesus. God took them from all the way from Adam to a people in Jesus, where simply trusting in God, in his character, not our ability, in his character to accept us, and he would. Well, if the scripture is true, and we see the characterization of, I am God, I do not change, then he's still the same today. And just as he gave them a name to call upon, not so that we can join Christianity, that was part of Adam's story. We don't want to join Sodom. That was part of Sodom's story, but Sodom was an example. We don't want to join the lost in the wilderness, but that was an example. We don't want to join the story of Adam, but it was an example that we too can call on the name of Jesus, not Jesus to come and save us, but on the God of Jesus, just as Paul says in Ephesians. Jesus is the name that was made above all names, not in just this age, but in the age to come. We're not needing to go around and making everybody join this church and get this message out so that we can be the body of Christ. That was Adam's story. But there is a message we can be getting out, which is, hey, did you know that God taught us that we can simply trust in his character and he would want to be in our lives? That he really actually doesn't want sacrifice and all these works. He doesn't want what we have. In fact, in Acts, Paul concludes some of his great thoughts of God saying, well, who can even do anything for God? God gives to man everything. What can we do? We're not his hands that God needs us to do anything for him. God matured spiritual mind, and that's part of the story of Adam. And we can now look on that story and say, yes, I too want to call upon the name of the God of Jesus so that I too can walk in that same relationship. So that's where we're coming from. I'm not going to put words into Mercy's mouth yet. That's where I'm coming from when I'm saying the Bible's relevant. Why? Because the precedence of God's love to show by every action he does to everyone standing around watching. Every action is a witness of God's character. And what do we see God's character? Is trustworthy. Pain, what was long, where he put up with the misgivings of other for a long time. This slipped my mind the name for it. Long suffering. So he'll wait for you. He's merciful. He's loving. He's caring to those in relation, just like us. It's what it is. And that's what he's proclaiming. And we can trust in that. Why? Look at the story of Adam. Who's God? Somebody who wouldn't let his people get away. What did Jesus say? I haven't lost one that you gave me. I can trust in the character of God. So what's the Bible now teaching me? Who God is. So the Bible just became the most important book in the world. Why? Because who was before Adam? The same people, us, just without the knowledge and the revelation of how to get to God. Those people were lost in the same way, lost in chaos and confusion, not knowing what to do to get God. So they went into sacrifice. So they were just like us, but we get the testimony of Adam. We get that example. They didn't have that example before Adam, for as far as we know. So the people before Adam would have been in the same boat we are, but we get the example of Adam. So we're in a much better position. They had to figure out how to come to God. We get it just given to us. Like, we're very, very lucky. And the Bible's extremely beneficial for those reasons. It helps get rid of our ideas, what we think is right, how we want things to be, and helps us to go, oh, God created the lion and the lamb. He created one to feed the other. So who does he love more? We can move into the realities because we're growing up. This world isn't all ice cream and cotton candy and fair rides. This world is very dangerous. Why would God create a dangerous world? We can move out of the fairy tale stories of God loves everybody and we got to go out and do this big puffed up picture. Why? Because the message isn't that. The message is more beautiful. What's the message? God will meet anybody, anywhere, at any time. They just simply trust in his character. Why? Because that's who he is. That's it. This isn't magic. It's just like if I wanted to know Mercy, I could go read every book in the world there is about her. I could go read her entire history, just like the Bible, the history of God with those people. I could read her entire history. It's not going to make me know God. It's not going to make me know Mercy. So how do I know God? How do I know Mercy? I got to spend time with her. I got to call her up. We got to do these videos. We got to hang out. We got to spend time. We need a relationship. And where do we see that as an example? What did God say to Moses, to Abraham? Though they were my friend. God didn't look at them as, that was my lawgiver. That was my authoritarian. They were my friend. God's looking for friends, family, relationship, however you want to put it together. The Bible speaks in those terms to reveal his character. That's relevant, not whether or not I got baptized. It's not what you pour over the head that makes a man right before God or defile him. It's not the food you put in, it's what comes out of that. It will reveal your heart. It's your heart. How do you think? Are you into God because you want to be saved from destruction? Well, if I went up to Mercy and I said, Mercy, can I please be your friend so you won't blow me up? I don't know if that's the best way to have a relationship. It's like, I like you because I'm afraid you're going to kill me. Like, that's very weird if we want to really look at what we're doing. But if I want to know Mercy, because, I think that Mercy, I heard the story about Mercy. There was a story. She was really trustworthy. She was very merciful to people. She waited very long for them to come around. And at the end, there's this beautiful event. I want to get to know this Mercy. And so I have to contact her and go and be with her and spend some time with her. That's Adam. Story of Adam. I read the story of Adam. Now, I want to know this God. Who is this God? I too want to know who the God of Jesus is. So that get to know him. Don't worry about those things. Just trust in him. All right, there's my spiel. I took the long time there. Mercy, talking origins with Mercy is more Mercy listening to origins at the moment, but I appreciate that. So please take the floor from me.
No, that was great. That was great. I love the Bible. I've always loved the Bible. Not because I wanted the Bible to say what I wanted to say. I actually just wanted to see what the Bible is saying. It was of great interest to me. And so I've really committed my whole life to that effort. And so the Bible blows me away because when we look into Genesis, we have a whole people where they are now calling upon the name of the Lord. I don't think we actually understand the time frame that Moses is writing into. Moses is writing like 2,000 years after the fact. That's a very long time, right? After the fact. But when we're talking about, these people that are calling upon the name of the Lord, I don't think we recognize, they are moving out of prehistory into history. The form of writing is now there. There's now civilizations, and it's all about kingdom building, kingdom building. How do you build a kingdom? Well, you have to have a suzerain to cover you. If you don't exist. You don't have a name. You don't have a territory. You have nothing. You are, So people don't understand that to bring this, humanity from this consciousness of a fear-based relationship with God.
Ooh, good description. That's a really good description.
Yeah, the fear base of not just one God, but many gods. We're talking about polytheism. Now in Genesis, we have Enosh that's calling upon the name of the Lord. It's now monotheistic. That is huge. People don't understand for thousands and thousands of years. They don't understand who God is or what God is. And they're looking at this relationship they have with creation, and it's very scary. Nature is very scary. It's very opposing to humanity. It's not in oneness, and you're having to survive. And so they're bringing all of this along. But now we get a little case study view of like, well, what was reality like? Oh my gosh, their whole worldview was based on fear. And what can we do to appease the gods? Enoch, Adam comes, and now what happens? Oh, we just call upon the name of the Lord. What? To have this relationship with God. And what you see in the context of the Old Testament is, okay, he's a suzerain and then the vassal relationship. Okay, no, he's now a king, and now there's a kingdom of priests. They have that relationship. Oh, no, it's a father to a son. Oh, wait a minute. Now it's getting more intimate. Oh, it's a husband to a wife. This is blowing their minds. If you actually understand First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, First Kings, Second Kings, you're seeing this story and you're like, oh my gosh, God is blowing them out of the water. He's saying, I don't know why you think I'm this way. I have to show humanity who I really am. And he has to do it in real life context. So he chooses this group of people, and just to let people know, they're very insignificant, by the way. Very small, insignificant group of people. But he chooses them, and he remains to be faithful, and he's trying to bring them out of prehistory consciousness, which is a very low consciousness, fear-based, and he's trying to raise them up to a higher consciousness, but it takes a very long time. Why? Because humanity is very stubborn, and we don't like change. We like the way we do things, even if it's wrong, because we just get familiar and comfortable with it. And so he takes very long suffering. He takes thousands of years to unpack this. And when we today read the Bible, we're now getting a snapshot picture of there. Oh my gosh, this is what they thought of God. They believed in what? They believed in blood sacrifice. I can't imagine. Like, why would you want to have a relation with God? And you have to kill animals to come into relation. All these like requirements. It's not that anymore. We can actually look at that and say, oh no, it's not requirement based, but it's acceptance based. That's why we now are gleaning from that. And you know, I tell people all the time, 90% of why the Bible is there is to show us what not to do. 90% of it. Because now we're seeing an example, a template where, oh, they had to go through all of that. They had to, you know, deal with what? Occultism, superstition. This was their worldview. They did temple, what? Prostitution. I don't think people understand. I mean, you look in the Old Testament, there are verses upon verses about temple prostitution and how they thought they needed to come into the presence of God. Crazy stuff. Child sacrifice, right? They're talking about a priesthood, that if a priest did not intercede on your behalf, you could not have a relationship with God. This was their worldview. This was their cosmology. We now can look back and then say, wow, for thousands of years, humanity believed that. They believed that. Oh my gosh. And look at where we're at now. So we don't, it's good news, folks. We don't want to be part of a suzerain vassal covenantal system. Don't want to be a part of that. But we can look at the old covenant and the new covenant, see it being finished and completed. And then from that, we can look at, okay, so who is God to us today, including in with the experiences that we have with God, with all the testimonies throughout time and through history. And we begin to connect the dots and see, oh my goodness, look at the long suffering of God, how he interacted with humanity in Mesopotamia. He now set an example, a testimony in writing, so that he never has to repeat that ever again. It's an example for people now to look into the text and say, oh, this is how they saw God. Well, now look at us. We have a higher revelation. We have a greater revelation. And now what? What do we have? We can enter into God's presence at any moment. It is not a national relationship. It's now an individual relationship. We have moved out of that. We're supposed to anyways, but there are a lot of people still today that they believe what? They have to go to the temple, they have to go to the church to experience God. They don't still understand this. This is how slow humanity is. This is how slow the consciousness is. And so now we have this text to show, look, these people were doing that back then. We don't need to do that anymore. Let me give you an example of what the new covenant system, what they figured out of the new heaven and the new earth, how to enter into God's presence. Here are these examples. Look at that. My goodness, we can learn so much from that to then say we have a greater reality with God. That's how I see the relevance of the Bible. And if you understand the Bible and the historical points, you have like verses upon verses to what? Support their worldview and how we're no longer a part of that worldview. That's like 2,000 years ago. We are beyond that worldview, but Christendom has really placed that worldview, actually has continued it, that old covenant mentality over and over and over. And that's where, you know, Adam Only is coming and saying, now it's not fear-based, but we're freedom-based. We're freedom-based now. That's what we're trying to do, to bring people higher up into understanding who God is.
I really like that phrasing of fear-based. I was just kind of flipping, and it's all over the old law. So if you want, take a quick look and you'll see, to the point Mercy was making, it's really, really good point. I haven't actually put this into the list, but it's one of the characteristics of God being displayed. There was actual law, as she was explaining, that says, do this and fear God, and these things will be good for you. You will be blessed. Do these things and fear God to do these things over and over. Fear God, fear God. But what's the new covenant? Well, if we understand suzerain vassal treaty system, they had a stipulations that if they lived up to this, then they got these blessings. But if they didn't live up to these things, they got curses and punishments. So they were afraid. If I don't live up to these things, God's going to come in and curse us. We saw what happened to Adam. We saw what happened to Noah. We saw, what happened to some of us here in Israel. So, fear. Oh, there. Okay, I'm all caught up. So fear based. Oh, I'm getting all stuttery here. So I'm just waiting for it to catch up. Okay. So fear-based now we see also evolve, as Mercy's saying. Why? Because what do we end up getting into the new covenant? We get with Paul talking about in the time of the new heavens and new earth. What's he say? Well, we are no longer to be under fear. In fact, we have a new spirit, not leading us to fear, but one calling out, Papa, Father. So Paul is talking about, look at how we've transitioned. We don't need to be in fear. That's old thinking. We don't think that way about God anymore. That's a character growth. The consciousness of humanity went from going, I need to fear God. Oh my God, God's going to come and squish me. I have to do I don't deserve to come into his presence. Whoa. And took them and went, yeah, just come here. You don't have to be afraid. No, just come here. No, it's okay. Come on. And like you said, freedom. Galatians 5:1 is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Therefore, again, never submit to another yoke of slavery that tells you not to go to God, that there's something in between you and God. So we see this character development that also duplicates sacrifice, as there's many texts talking about God's, I never desired sacrifice. Oh, I'm sick and tired of these sacrifices. As we keep moving further and further away from Adam, God keeps revealing more and more of his character, as Paul actually does say in Romans, for God's character is now revealed apart from the law. And here we get to sit back and say, oh, I see what happened in the example of Adam. When I look upon the remains of Adam, God doesn't want us doing those things. He just wants us to come to him and trust his character, that he'll accept us, that he's that way. Just like when I think about, hey, my son, if Dad, I just want to come to you. I don't have, well, first you have to do this, and then next you have to do this. And then I'll check to see if you've done this. And then maybe if you've done this, I'll determine whether or not you're worthy. But if you're not worthy, then maybe I'll find a way to get you in anyway. Like, what human does that? And how can we pretend to be better than God, who's supposed to be love, and we won't put stumbling blocks before our sons? Why would he? So God's evolved our thinking, not because, it's like we're not going from amoebas to humans, but just as Paul said, have your mind renewed daily. Don't have your consciousness seared. We don't want to be stuck in the old thinking. We want to move forward. And how? By the building up of this image, this picture, the story of Adam. It's so relevant. Why? What else do we have to compare? God signed off on this if Jesus rose from the dead. If that is true, it's validated. It's not just some paintings in a wall, on some wall now. It's not just some text over here. If Jesus rose from the dead, he signed off on it. If those miracles happen, he was Acts 2:22. God was in Jesus performing miracles, attesting to him. So either you go and read the story of Adam, and at the end, if your heart is convinced that was real, then call on the name of the God of Jesus. That's the point. If you don't enjoy it, you didn't think it was real, then move on. It's good. It's fine. It's not a big deal. If God wants to be with you, you're gonna be with him. Like, come on. Like, you're gonna sit here and say God couldn't take care of all of that Adam stuff and he figured it all out. We look at all the amazing stuff of all the way from Adam all the way to Jesus. I say the end, the end from the beginning, all that stuff. But he can't find those whom he loves. Like, so we're making God bigger. You're not putting God, making him small, taking away his power. God is bigger. He's bigger than any credit we've ever given him. He will meet us where we're at. He met Adam where he was at. He met Noah where he was at. But just as James says, all the sons of God are raised up and disciplined. Is it James or Jude? It's James, right?
James, yeah.
And God raised Adam up. He raised Noah up. He raised Israel up and matured it all in Jesus. Why? Because they couldn't do it. That's God's heart. To watch your son crawl and crawl and crawl and crawl, and then your heart goes up for him and you pick him up and you make him walk. So I don't want to preach on this, but I do want to hand it off to you, Mercy, because this has pushed. I didn't realize we're already up to 55 minutes here. Is there some kind of, like, because again, we're not trying to create a religion here, but when it comes to this, there's such a release for me because I now know, and it makes it more real to me that it completes, and I can look on that, because if it didn't end, like if it didn't complete, we would still be waiting to find out if God was trustworthy. Because Jesus was raised, because he did complete it, and because it ended, now I know he is all those things, so I can trust in him. I was wondering maybe if you could hammer maybe that point a little, because that, again, I think that's right up there with audience relevancy of the whole. If it didn't end, we're still waiting to see how this thing plays out to find out if God is trustworthy, aren't we?
Right. And that's a real important point. Like, why did it have to end? Because everything came to its fruition, and because of that, like you said, God signed off on that. I think when I read the Bible, the biggest the takeaway that I have is that there not only was their cosmology and worldview of God very fear based, but it was very much separation based. They had this constant awareness that they were completely separated from God. And there's fear when you have separation from God. There literally is. There's a lot of anxiety, all of these things. And it took God working with Adam's people, like, 5,000 years to take that down, to bring that down and break it apart, break it apart, break it apart. So when I see the new covenant ending, what I see, what I can, reading through all the books that
Yeah, not so much ending, but fulfilling,
right,
completing.
it
Yeah,
it
yeah.
still, and therefore it ended. We don't need to go on and on and on because it finished. What I'm seeing is, oh my gosh, humanity is not separated from God ever, ever, ever. Though we might feel it like that today. Oh, I did something really bad, or I thought something really bad. Oh my gosh, and that Christian or church consciousness that comes down upon us, guilt, shame, all that stuff. I can then look at, that situation and be like, no, I'm not separated from God. In fact, I can go to God. I don't need an intermediary priesthood on my behalf to work a deal out with God to make me all right. I can actually go to him directly and interface with him, what we call prayer or communion or what fellowship, talk with him and begin to what develop that relationship with him. So we are no longer in separation mode. I think still today people think they are. And so that's what I'm saying. It takes so long for people to come out of this, and it's like that is like my number one message is that we are no longer separated from God. We are in his presence now. That's what we see in the Bible. That's what God was trying to bring them out of, but they couldn't believe it. But that's why they had to go through all of that to finally make those markers and say, okay, now since I did that and showed it to you, I will never have to repeat that ever again. Here you go. Here's the proof. Here's the evidence. Here's the testimony. And so therefore the Bible is relevant in that way. If you can extract that and understand that, that's the big takeaway that I have.
We also get the answer because there's a big problem too with, people before Adam, people living at the time outside of the covenant bounds of Adam while Adam was alive. And we've got to come to understand, and I know this is shocking for people to hear, and this might run a little bit late, but it also means that God was working and knowing people before Adam, not through Jesus, not through the covenant, but through his character. So it's not up to us to perform. So that means even before Adam, all those people, God would meet with them in spite of them doing things wrong. We got to understand God is greater than our mistakes. God is greater than our lack of knowledge. God is greater. We got to keep saying that. God is greater. Anything you can think of, God is greater than your division. Like, you can try to divide yourself from God all you want, but God is greater than what you can divide. You can go on any boat and go to the edge of any sea. God will still be there. You can't divide yourself from God. We got to get that mindset. We got to get into there. Why? Because before Adam, God was still meeting with people. What about those people in Brazil that God planted there, that were there at 3000 BC? Because there were people there. What about those people? Well, they couldn't go to Christ. He hadn't been born yet. In fact, the Christian missionaries didn't get there till about the 1500s AD. So not for a long time. So God planted these people there, made them unaware of the covenant, removed them from the access to covenant. Thus, therefore, God, who's supposed to be love, damned all these people because they simply were put where God put them. Or God meets people where they're at in spite of their inabilities. And that's through relationship. God's always gone through the heart, not through your. Oh, all right, there I am. God's always gone through the heart, not through what we do. What we do is what we think is important. We go and create a kingdom and say, God's with us. We do these things. God wants to be with us, so he'll meet us where we're at. He met Adam where he's at. But I don't believe from the example he's happy when he meets us where we're at. He wants better for us, so he raises us up better. So just as those people before, or those people during, and people after Adam, we not knowing Adam isn't knowing Adam isn't a prerequisite to knowing God. We have to grow past this. How can anybody, any of and I'm not even going to go into like pygmies and all tiny little groups. What about the fact that nobody in North America, South America, Australia, Russia, India, and Africa? I don't want to go too much into Egypt and all that kind of stuff, because once we get in the Middle East, it's it spreads out a bit. But 90% of the world never heard of God through the Hebrew covenant. 99% of humans never heard of those and were never given those options. And now here we stand today, and it's one of the biggest religions in the world, and it's not even half the population. Not everybody will meet God through that one example. We can't think that low of God. And so what is Adam? He's an amazing example. God's testimony to mankind about who he is, not what his laws are. What can you learn from a law? Don't jump on my couch or you're going to get in trouble. Ooh, he really likes his couch. That's what it tells you. But it doesn't tell you anything about who I am. And so we got to stop trying to relate to God through that, because he went out of his way to give us the example of Adam. Why? Because of all those people before Adam that would have benefited from the story of Adam. We now have light in the world. We don't have to be in chaos. They did, as far as we know. And so we need to branch past our predeterminations. Yes, the text says Jesus is the only name in which a man may be saved. From what? The coming judgment and wrath of God upon the sons of disobedience, the body of Moses. They were saved, all of them, every single one of them. Jesus said, I did not lose one that you gave me. All of Israel was saved. Not is going to be. We don't need to be saved anymore. Why? The day of wrath came. It ended. It finished. We don't need that. We need to know God. We need to just have relationship. We need to come in with him. Why? Because that's who God is. So there's a big example that God doesn't need a religion to meet somebody. However, he gave us the greatest, and now you can't tell me it's big again. If God wanted this gone for 600 years, it basically disappeared from the earth. Right after Israel ended, it was gone. Why all of a sudden is it back? And why did we find these scrolls in what 1940s to confirm that we had found it. So we get these Dead Sea Scrolls. Why did that pop out all of a sudden? It's very weird how we're not allowed to get rid of this story. It's almost like we're supposed to have it. And so when billions of people are reading it and looking to it for answers, every single one of those people has one interest in mind, and that's how do they stand with God. So it's obviously doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is causing this conversation. So hopefully, giving you lots to chew on here, lots to think about, because the Bible has to be the most important book that has ever been, is the most important book, and always will be. Why? Because it's God's testimony of his character to mankind. And we get to look at the remains of what that was so that now we can be a better position to make our choices about how we proceed in this world with him. I hope that answers the question, why is the Bible relevant today, even though we're not the reason why it was written? Hopefully that makes sense, Mercy.
Yeah. It's an eternal testimony. You don't want to get rid of it ever again. And it is very relevant to us. The same questions are being asked because the heart of man is the same. And because God is the same, God was like this back then, but humanity couldn't understand him that way. So God had to lower himself and join them in that worldview, work in all that system of polytheism, of all of that, to then bring them out of that. So that this God that we worship and that we know is the same then, yesterday, today, and will be forever. So this is why you never want to throw the Bible out, even when the Bible has been misused and abused for all the wrong reasons. And we know that throughout church history, it's been used for all the wrong reasons. Nevertheless, we don't want to throw it out. We don't want to chuck it out. It's an important piece of document. Many people have gone through a lot to preserve this document. It's just that we're now trying to understand it and meet it as where it's at, not trying to inject or project our indoctrination into it.
Fantastic point. We are trying to understand it from what it's if this is God's testimony to us, we better not mess around with it by putting our ideas into it. I froze there pretty good, so I'm just waiting. There we go. We don't want to put our ideas into it. That's a great way to end it. I think it was a great summary point, because that's what we're trying to avoid here. We're trying to better understand the Bible, and the number one thing we need to do is pull ourselves out of it, because it's in our intent. We don't try to, but for some reason we just bias ourselves in. So it's a fantastic point to enter on. Everybody listening, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, because this has been, it's a tough one to enter into, because honestly, who wants to hear, they don't necessarily need Jesus to save them from some coming punishment. But let me say it like this: who doesn't want to hear you don't need Jesus to save you from some coming punishment? Isn't that great? You don't have some coming punishment. It's fantastic. So I leave to you today the understanding that Jesus is the most important single living human being that had ever lived, because through that human being, God proved himself. And without him, we would have no hope and understanding. We'd still be just as lost as everybody else. Jesus is, I'm just going to wait for that. There we go. Jesus is the pinnacle of humanity. And we need to recognize why that importance was there and why there's so much importance on him. But what we need to also do is leave him in that position. Yes, it says straightforward in the scripture, Jesus will be worshiped as God. No one's here to tell you what you need to do. No one's here to tell you what you ought to do and think and all that. But hopefully we got some questions, make some thoughts, stick them in the pocket, carry it around for a while, and see if it'll hit shit. And I want to say thank you for joining this conversation. And just honestly, look forward to where we go the next time. I thought it was going to be a lot harder and a little bit more scary than it probably was, but hopefully you guys all enjoyed it. Thank you, Mercy, for joining.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's been fantastic. And I just want to say, wherever you are, I hope this finds you well, and God bless.